we've shown you how to do simple grid systems on this gallery and talked about that. But now let's move into designing page layout for grid. And typically the first thing you do is you've got to have some kind of mock-up, something that you want to build in your grid for. And what I like to do is look at this and divide this up into where I want different things to go, right? And what elements are what. And so when I look at this, this could be, you know, we could make this like a 3-column grid. So like column here, column here, column here, and a row here, row here, row here, row for all of our content. You might say, well, you know, should each of these be columns, you know, or inside of the grid? Well, this could be a grid within a grid. And so we could have a grid for our page layout and then have a grid inside of that, or a flex box inside of that. You know, looking at our navigation here, this could also be its own little flex box within grid, and that's probably an appropriate approach to that. You know, a lot of people have talked about using flex to control your page layout, and it's not really the best idea. And the reason why is grid and flex have a lot of similarities as far as aligning items and doing some different things there, but grid is a 2-dimensional you know, way of looking at things rather than flex 1-dimensional. Flex can either be horizontal or vertical, but grid can do both. And so when we're looking at page layout, grid definitely makes a stronger argument for doing that. And so you can mix those. You can have your page on grid and your menu on flex and a subgrid inside of your grid. And that's totally acceptable and probably the way you should be doing things. For this, the way I think I'm going to first flip this over into grid is I'm not going to turn these bars on the side into grid. I'm going to let them continue to be the body, and I'm going to have one grid inside. So this item with the shadow, this box layout, is going to be our grid. And in here, I might do some additional things where I might take this and break this up into 6 different columns. So, you know, I have a column and a column and a column and a column. And so I could take, you know, this whole section of types or something and put it to the side, and I could take our history and put it to the other side, or I could, you know, move this image around. And we'll show you some of the benefits to having that column set up. So first thing is, let's look at our wrapper. And again, if you remember, it does obey that child-parent relationship. So if I apply our grid to the wrapper, then our header becomes a child, our navigation becomes a child, our hero image becomes a child, our main becomes a child, and our history, our footer becomes a child. And so that's fine. I can take each of those items and move them around accordingly how I best see fit. Okay, so let's do that first. Let's take our wrapper and let's turn it into grid. So we're going to add a display as grid to this. And just for the heck of it, I'm going to turn off this min, width, and max. Well, I'm going to comment those out, because I'm going to be resizing. I want to show you how a lot of that goes. Our background color can still be white. That's fine. Our width can be 80%, so it has the bars. It's going to center itself. It's going to round the corners, add a shadow. And right now, you can kind of see what that looks like. It hasn't done anything major to it yet. So we're going to do that. So right now, that is grid, and it is you know, doing some things there, but we need to add in some columns into this. Now this is where it's going to get a little sketchy right now. It is technically grid, but it's not a very clean grid. Oh, and one other thing we can do with this, which is really handy, right click it and go to inspect inside of Chrome and look on our wrapper, and you can see here it's got some dotted edges. When I hover over wrapper, you can see each grid item. So right now we have a grid with one column, and each column is basically using auto, which is allowing the contents to determine everything, and just kind of goes down. Okay, so let's turn this into a 6-column layout right now and see what that looks like. So what we're going to do that is we're going to do grid, template, columns, And we want to have 6 columns, so I'm just going to use a repeat. Okay, and let's repeat 6 times. You know, we could say something like 1 fraction, right? And that would just do, you know, 6 columns equally done. But sometimes I might want one of my columns to be, I don't know, bigger or smaller or something like that. Let's do this. Let's say rather than 1FR, we're going to put a min max right here. And I want to say that the smallest it ever can go is 0. So I'm okay with the columns collapsing in on themselves. And the largest, I want each column to be, let's say, 150 pixels. And so, you know, if we look at that, that's going to be, what, 900 pixels across the screen is the largest this can ever go. And I think that will be fine. Let's look at that and see what that looks like. So I'm going to refresh that. And now you can see how our items, a header, navigation, our image has been put into that column. Our main is in here and our footer. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so this is really ugly. But we do have those kind of showing up. And we can look at that again by going in a wrapper. And you can see the orange on the sides is our margin 0 auto, where it's centering it. And then we have those you know, columns resizing. Now again, we can go all the way down and it's going to get really small. If I hover over wrapper, you can still see those, and they could go all the way down to 0 if I wanted them to, but you know, they're trying to maintain some sizes. So the largest it will ever go is 150 pixels, but the smallest it will ever go is 0. And so we go really big, you know, there's that 150 pixels, I think. All right, well, let's go with that, and let's show you the next step on how one might break these all apart. And this is where some of the magic starts taking place. This is where grid starts making more sense and is actually kind of legit. So we're going to go here, and we're going to say that our header, we want our header to occupy a certain space, okay? And so what we're going to do is we're going to use something called a grid dash column. And we could do a grid column start and end, but we're going to combine those, and we're going to say we want our grid column to start from 1 and go to -1. And that might not make any sense at all, but we're going to look at it. And you can hover over wrapper, and you can see how the header now goes all the way across that row. Now this is where I want to pull this into play. This is important, okay? So if I have an item and I'm trying to have it span a specific space, what I do is I look at these numbers, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It does not start counting at 0. I want you to see that. And this goes up to 6, but this is only a column 5 layout. And so what I did is I said I wanted to go from 1 to -1. And you look on here, -1 doesn't make a lot of sense. But if we look down here, if we go the opposite way, starting on this edge, -1, -2, it goes back to 6. And so 1 to -1 will go all the way across the other side. Or in our case, what I could have done, and which probably would have made more sense to everybody, is go 1 to 7. And 1 to 7, you know, looks exactly the same. And you can see 1 to 7 going there. So if we count up, we can say 1, 2, let's look at these. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that is a 6-column layout there. You can see that better there. There we go. So 1 to 7 is going across. So sometimes if you ever see a -1 or a -2, you know, if I said a -2 or something like that, you could probably look at that example here. And you see how the navigation's moved up underneath it. So our header really only goes up to number 6 right here. So you can count those like 1 right here, 2 right here, 3, 4, 5, you know, 6 there. and then our navigation is going to take the next one. So let's play around with this some more. Let's go through and finish allocating where we want each of these to go. So I'm going to go 1 and -1 just for the heck of it right now. And then the next item on our list is our navigation. Oops, copied too much there. Okay, that looks good. And then from there we want the ID hero, hero image right there. And then we want our main. We want our footer. And that should make everything show up how it was. And you can see we do have a 6-column layout. Now let's play around with this a little bit and do some interesting things. Okay, let's mix together rows where specifically you want things to go. So our header, let's leave that there for right now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our navigation, and rather than grid column, we're going to use a grid dash row. And we're going to say we want to start counting at row 1 and go to row 2. And you can see how that's up at the top now when we look at our wrapper. Okay, so it's taking that space, and then the next row is getting automatically filled by the next one. And let's go to our hero image, and let's do grid. We're going to start counting row 2 and go to number 3. And you can see now we have that and then this. Now let's take this header here, and rather than having it go all the way across the screen, it looks like there's enough room that we could put it in 3 columns. Okay, let's do that. So header is going to start counting at 4 and go to, actually, let's go from 1 to 4. That's what I want it to do. Okay. I'll hover over our wrapper and okay, that's fine. The next thing I want to do is I want to apply a grid row, and I want to put it on top of the hero image. And so I'm going to say that this row is going to be 2, 2, 3. And we'll look at it, and that should disappear, and it did. And the reason is it's actually behind everything right here. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to stack our logo in this negative space next to the monkey's eyes kind of looking at it. But because it came first, it's showing up kind of, you know, underneath. And so what we can do, we can use order. Or we could, if we wanted to, we could even just have it be last. So I'm going to say order 1, and I'll refresh it, and you can see where that monkey now is going on top. So the cool thing that's happening here is right now, I hope you see that normal flow is being completely broken. Okay, we have header showing up, and that's not showing up at the top. And then we put nav, and then we can put the hero image. In all reality, I could put header underneath our footer, and it would still show up right here. And so that's really breaking out of normal flow. And we really can take header, nav, our hero image, main, footer. We can just completely scramble those in whatever order we want. But because I'm going through and I'm specifying where I want each of those lines to show up, then it shows up that way. And, you know, and you can see these are kind of going down and doing their thing. Our types, we could go through and make it into a 4 column if we wanted to, and our history into a 2 column. Let's do that really quick and see what that might look like. Actually, no, we can't, because that's main. And again, this is a good example of you have to maintain that child-parent relationship. Those other columns are inside of main, and I cannot resize them into different columns unless I break them outside of main and make them a direct child of the wrapper. So again, I can only move these items right here and resize them. So that totally, you know, I said that, but as soon as I said that, I thought, oh wait, I've got, you know, these are not children, these are grandchildren, and so I can't move them. Now, one fun thing, there is module 2 in the CSS Grid spec coming down the pipeline from the W3C that is allowing us to do subgrids and doing some really cool alignment with that. But that's still years off before we're able to use that natively across the board on all browsers. But there is some cool stuff with that happening. Now let me show you one shorthand method here before I move on. Okay, so we have grid column 1 to 4 and a grid row 2 to 3. And what we can do is we can use a grid dash area, and we can say something like, okay, we want it to be 1, we want to start at, actually I think that's rows if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it is. So we want to start at row 2, and we want to start at column 1. And then we want to go to row 3, and we want to go to column 4. And so this basically equals that. It's a rows first, so we got a 2 to 3, and then we have columns, which is a 1 to 4. And you can kind of see how that would work. When I pull that off and go back and refresh it, it still shows up the same, and we're fine that way with that header.